what I wanted to start off with is, who are you when you play in the SCA?
I am Lady Evelyn Highwood, and I am from the Shire of Silverkeep.
How long have you played in the SCA?
Let's see. I started at 12th night 2018, so 2 years.
What was your first impression of the SCA?
I was actually introduced to the SCA long before I joined. Heavy Fighters came and did a demonstration for my German class. And so all I thought that the SCA was heavy fighting. And my parents refused to let me go check it out. So I just thought it was a bunch of fighters. And then that following summer, I went to the Renaissance Fair and ran into the same group. And I was like, oh, no, they're actually a lot more than just fighters.
What is your number one interest in the SCA?
Well, what drew me to the SCA and what really makes me want to continue is costuming and garb, because I love the aesthetic of historical clothing. And so that's kind of where my passion is. I think the number one thing that I struggled with is going to events and seeing all the beautiful things that people had, the period dishware and the tents and these huge elaborate garb outfits, and that I look at what I have and it's not nearly up to that standard. So I felt like I wasn't up to snuff. That was a hard part for me. It's just like the monetary, because I'm a college student and I don't have thousands of dollars to just buy a new tent, so I'm still in the mundane tent. I still, wear a lot of Amazon stuff that, Amazon costumes that I find that aren't super comfortable, or I've turned a sheet into a makeshift toga thing. But it's just that because I'm not at the point where I want to be with, especially my encampment, my feast gear. And that's a hard part for me. The other thing is the intimidation factor. You're introduced to these people and you're like, this is a pelican, a laurel, and a knight all in one. They have all this titleage to them. And I'm like, how do I talk to them?
Has it gotten easier?
I think so. With most people are very oh yeah, you're a newbie, but we're gonna really welcome you in and make you feel like you've been here your whole life.
Do you find that there is times where you don't feel welcome?
There have been a few times. The main thing is trying to balance mundane political stuff with SCA stuff. There's a lot of differing opinions in the SCA, and so that was kind of hard at times. The main instance that comes to my mind was my very first event. I said, I love your costume. And it was very obvious that this was my first event. Was wearing it looked like a garbage bag. It was made out of rip stock. It was bad. And she just teared into me about using, you don't call it a costume, it's garb, you gotta get it right. And I'm like, sorry. And I shuffled back to my table. And I think that could have been handled well, here in the SCA we call it garb, but thank you so much. And this is what I did to achieve that. I would have loved to sit and talk about the costuming process, but instead I got yelled at.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. Has it gotten better though? Have you had negative experiences like that still, or are they better?
Better for the most part. I'd say about 90% of the people that you come across in the SCA are genuinely good human beings.
I guess that's what you get with any volunteer organization, right?
Exactly. Nothing's going to be perfect 100% of the time.
What are some things that you think are the top important things for a new person to know?
Because there's a lot that you need to know. because I bring a lot of people with me to events because I don't like going alone. So I often drag newcomers. Like this last 12th night, I dragged my boyfriend, and we had only been dating for a month at this point. And I dragged him from Bozeman all the way to Billings, where he didn't know anyone. And I was like, if you see somebody with a pointy hat, that's usually a symbol that they're nobility. Be nice. But like most of the time, if you show up and you're making an effort, most people will be super supportive and want you to be like, hey, we want you to come back. Like, please come to more events. Like, we want you to come. I tell them the number one thing, don't call it, learn from my mistake, don't call it a costume. You don't have to, a lot of my friends think you have to speak in Old English. I'm like, no, you don't have to speak in an accent or Old English. Have fun, you know, and then I just kind of talk up the events like, oh, there's going to be fighting, and like take it all in, because like you can only have your first event once.
What are your aspirations in the SCA? What are things that you want to achieve or do? I mean, you've been in 2 years. I like to tell people the SCA is a lifetime hobby. What would you like to achieve?
This might sound a little vain, but I'd like to be queen someday.
Good for you. Awesome.
I'd like to do Pelican or Laurel. I haven't really talked more about that. I was lady in waiting to Queen Guinevere for a day, and that was so much fun, and I just want to do more of that. I'd really like to get bigger bardic presence in Artemisia. Down the line plan is to possibly move to Drachenwald. We want to move to England, hopefully sometime after I'm graduated college.
That's an awesome goal. I love that. What are some of your bucket list events that you'd like to do?
Anzac, Estrella. Oh, and another thing that just came to mind as like a goal for SCAs, to make the SCA more disability friendly. In the last few months, I've had to start using a cane, and I've been thinking a lot more about like, well, how am I going to go to SCA events? Because they're all on grass. How do we make the SCA more accessible to, you know, people in wheelchairs and people that aren't, you know, that use crutches or a walker or a cane? So I want to start a conversation about how to make it more accessible.
That's a good conversation to start. Absolutely. Do you feel like the SCA struggles with inclusion?
It can. I've had a lot of conversation with some female fighters and how that particularly can be a hard field for, you know, because they get, you know, it's the boys' game. And there's this weird duality of the SCA because, like, on one hand, we want to be super inclusive and, like, but at the other hand, we're still trying to uphold these ideas from a time that was very uninclusive. And chivalry can be uninclusive if not done carefully. Women fighters are looked at differently. Seeing it as somebody that has gone from being able to go to events no problem to it getting worse to where I have to now think about this kind of stuff. How do I go to a camping event where, you know, it's spread out over a mile and there's no trail? They don't have like places to sit along the way, and you have to carry your own chairs, and it can be difficult. The SE is kind of an expensive game, especially seeing it as a college student. I wouldn't want you to camp with us because we're a period-only encampment. You know, and the modern tents, of course, are hidden behind everything, so that makes it even further.
From a new person's perspective, the SCA expectation of periodness is daunting. What are some things that you feel that they could do to break down that barrier of that cost and expectation factor?
I think if we had more classes on how to cheat period, like I found there's something on Pinterest like a couple days ago where you can turn a simple like screen, like one of those like $20 Walmart, into a period tent using like old rugs that it looks like a Persian tent. But like having more classes on, you know, how to skirt the period. And the other thing though is that the ANS can be a lot of that can be expensive. So changing some of the rules on, how period things need to be to enter ANS competitions, and having, maybe opening up a separate section of like, this is a period dupe of this. Evelyn is from the Highwood region of England, is the daughter of a military man. And that's how they got their titleage, is that he won honors in the war. And actually, I've kind of intertwined my persona with that of my significant other. He is from France, and he is the youngest son of his family. So he left England to be a Shakespearean actor. So that's how Evelyn and Jean-Pierre met, is that she saw him perform, and then he heard her sing, and the rest is history. And
oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
I've learned sometimes it's okay to keep your SCA friends and your Facebook friends separate, and that it is okay to unfriend SCA friends if they're doing something mundanely that you don't like, but you still respect them in an SCA world. They don't have to know you in a mundane world. I can respect the people in the SCA for what they are in the SCA and love them there, but I don't have to listen to them in the mundane world. That if you feel like you're doing too much, it's okay to take a step back. Because I know I kind of jumped in head first. I wasn't even a full year into the SCA yet, and I became MOAS, and then it just kind of became too much, and I didn't know what I was doing, and so it was okay to take a step back and realize that taking care of mundane is important. Mundane life comes first. The newbie rush is real.
Thank you, Evelyn, for joining me.
Yes, of course.
And allowing me to interview a new person in the SCA. It's nice to have new perspective on a game that has been around for decades. We want new people to join, so having a new voice is really important, I think, in this video series. Thank you very much for joining me.
Yes, of course.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.